It is that time again. All right, everyone. Hi, my name is Brandy Keeler. I am Assistant Director of Admissions here at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. And I am super excited for another CCS Alumni Live. I realize this image has our guest head cut off, so I'm not going to use that. But yeah, welcome to another CCS Alumni Live. So for those of you who are new to CCS Alumni Live, it is a weekly conversation where we talk with graduates from CCS about their journey from high school to career. And I'm super excited for today's conversation because it is a special topic conversation. We've done about 30 of these Alumni Live conversations throughout the spring until now, and there has been one clear theme throughout all of these conversations, and that's that nobody's journey is the same, right? So we're seeing that these artists have different paths from high school to community college to changing majors to all these things. But the one thing that is consistent with everyone is that they feel that what they are doing is worth it, right? They feel that they are glad that they pursued that creativity. But what does someone do when the journey gets rough or they encounter hardship and adversity? How do you stay motivated? I know this is a big topic, especially with what's going on in the world today. How do you stay hungry enough to chase your creative dreams? That's what we're going to talk about today with our guest. I'm excited to add him to the live in a second, Bryan Young, who had to ask himself those very same questions. And he has over 20 years of experience in the automotive and industrial design industry. And he has a wealth of knowledge on how to persevere as an artist and designer. So I'm going to add Bryan Young to our conversation for today's IG Live. Hello, Bryan. How are you?
Hey there, I'm doing good, doing good.
Awesome, awesome. I'm really excited for this topic today. I think this is like the most relevant time of all of history to talk about perseverance
Yeah,
as an
yeah,
artist and
yeah.
a designer. Um, so before we start talking about the special topic, one thing I want to let folks know for those who are new to Alumni Live and tuning in, if you have questions throughout the conversation today and you want to get those questions answered live by Bryan, make sure to put those in the little question button in the bottom of your Instagram screen so we can ask those live. So let's get started. Bryan, tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing as an artist and a designer. What are you doing these days?
Oh man. Well, let's see. I wear several hats as an artist and a designer. Currently, the most recent hat that I've put on is that we relaunched an apparel line that was inspired. The original inspiration was my son's when the movie Black Panther came out, and so I just kind of started to do a doodle, which led into a more finished illustration, which led into a shirt, and and then that kind of snowballed into other apparel, and so that was a couple of years ago. Kind of went away from it, and then during this quarantine and pandemic, um, uh, I felt the nudge to bring that back, to bring not only that, but a lot of my personal artwork, automotive and others. And I've been consulting industrial design and transportation design um, since the recession, since
Mhm.
2008. So that's when it really um, uh, got real, I guess you could say. And throughout the years, I tended to float back and forth between corporate design, or designing corporately, I should say. And last year I was at Roush here in suburban Detroit, designing a wide variety of products for Roush, whether it be the fun stuff like Mustangs or some things I still can't talk about because they're not in production. And most recently, another corporate position's been design manager, I guess you could say, of an RV company, a multi-billion-dollar RV company, where I'm helping to institute industrial design thinking not just styling. And
Hmm.
yeah, so that's pretty. Try to keep it short, but there's a lot more. Art. My art is selling, and so yeah, yeah,
So, visual artist, apparel designer, consultant for the industrial design industry, manager
right,
for a automotive RV company.
yeah,
So many things, right?
yeah. That's
So
all the professional stuff with art
right,
and design.
right, and I'm sure there's other things in addition to that, right? Life and
Yeah,
personal career pursuits and all of that. So I
yeah.
know one of the things you mentioned really quickly, but I'd like to rewind to that in some of the work you were talking about that you're currently doing. You talked
Hmm.
about one of the projects starring during the recession. And I know
Yeah,
in some of the alumni live interviews that we've done, we've had some graduates who came out into the recession and talk about how
yeah.
that really like shook up the world. What was going on with you? You said you went back to that idea from consulting during the recession, but what happened during that point?
Well, during the recession or the Great Recession, or I was a designer at General Motors, and that was my second go around. Before that, I was a designer doing semi trucks at Navistar, and a lot of my friends who I went to school with, who I went to CCS with, were at the studio. GM had set up an offsite studio, and so I decided to come back to Detroit, and I was back at GM amongst friends. It didn't feel like work. One,
Mhm.
because if you're an artist or a designer, I really feel like it's not work to get, it's that cliche. It's not work to get paid to do what you love. But the recession was it was something different in my career at that point where our studio was hit hard and I was laid off. I was let go. A lot of others, we were downsized, and then next thing you know, the reality of okay, I love being an artist and a creative person, but uh, how do I eat? How do I pay my student loans? I had
Mhm.
my first son at that point, and to be real, I'm thinking, how do I pay child support? How do I how do I live? And so um, uh, I had lightweight started um, selling my automotive illustrations and paintings. Before that, I really wasn't serious about it because it was more for me. I'd come home from work and then I would just create. And then when the recession hit and I'm out of work and okay, well, how do you, well, I might need to kick this up a bit,
Mhm.
to bring some income in. And so I started selling those, and then I got an opportunity to do a freelance job, a consulting job.
Mhm.
And then that led to another and another. And then so that kind of helped. But during that period, also during that recession, I also um, something major happened to me health wise that
Mhm.
impacted not just my health but being an artist and a designer and any creative person. uh, I would assume a lot of the students, a lot of our fellow creative types, one of the most important things for us besides our creativity, our hands. And I was nearly killed in a motorcycle accident here in suburban Detroit, and I'd broken my drawing hand in the incident, so I had to overcome that.
That seems like aside from going blind, which I have personal experience with, aside from going blind, that's like the second to me highest fear that an artist could have, right? Like losing your drawing hand, losing that force
Right.
that really allows you to do what you do creatively. When that happened to you, what gave you the strength to like, well, clearly you had to heal and rehabilitate, but what gave you the
Hmm.
strength to decide like, I'm going to stay a creative person even though this happened to me? Because I know for me personally, when I was diagnosed with my eye disease, I was like, I don't know if I could do art anymore because
Yeah.
it relies on my eyes. So tell me
Right.
a little bit about what inspired you to persevere beyond that incident.
Well, uh, honestly, the weird thing is that before before my accident, I had already started to mentally reevaluate being a designer, and it's been my life's passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I had already taken steps, and I've shared with a couple of people, but I don't think anybody at our alma mater knew this. But up until that point of the recession, I had several challenges in my career as a designer corporately, and so this was the big one where I'm like, dude, man, what am I? Is this my path? Is this meant for me?
Mm-hmm.
So I started to make adjustment to maybe step away. I started the process of joining the Michigan State Police and to serve uh, in that manner. So GM happened, and then I did the paperwork and also looked at seriously into the National Guard, and then the accident happened. And in my mind, I'm thinking, one, I'm alive, but I was thinking, okay, maybe this is God telling me to stay on the path of being a designer, even
Mm-hmm.
though I had a long road of recovery ahead. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So for some, that may have pushed them to say, you know what, I'm going to go and step out of art and design, but the it's it's all I knew. It's all I
Mm-hmm.
know. I've always I've 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 painted, I've doodled, I've been creative artistically since I was a little kid, and so it's a frustration of like these obstacles kept coming up, but what else could I do? I'm sure I could do other stuff, but would the passion be there?
Right. And I think that's the thing that I wonder about, because I definitely am a believer of like listening to signs that are being sent to you, right? But how,
Right,
like
right.
the question that I think of is like, how do you differentiate the signs that are tests and things that are,
Yeah.
like lessons, things that are saying no change paths. And so I'm glad to hear that what you received from these different obstacles was like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. There's something that I'm probably learning or gaining along the way throughout these obstacles.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question for you would be, what is something that you've learned from these adversities as you've been on this path as a creative?
Um, well, I think. Oh, the flyer that you guys put together, you put together perseverance. That's one thing that I've learned, and um, yeah, I would say perseverance. If I could wrap it up in one word that I learned about myself, and learned about pursuing a career or a livelihood in this lane, because being a creative person, being an artist, being a photographer, being a fine artist. You know, I remember countless times throughout my life's journey. I'd run across strangers or whoever, and you tell them what you want to be, and oftentimes the public misperception is that you can't make a living,
Mm-hmm.
you can't sustain, you know, life. So that you hear that enough, and you're kind of thinking, huh, maybe I should, stop. And had a high school guidance counselor when I said I wanted to be a car designer, and he's like, "Oh, you mean technical school? We're going to get you." I was like, "No, no." Luckily, my art teacher at that time said, "No, just stay the course." So I would
Mm-hmm.
say perseverance, to persevere through my medical challenges and family, and you name it. Everyone, I would say everyone probably has some moment in their life where they're like, man, should I stop or should I keep going? And then
Mm-hmm.
if you persevere through it, you can have some level of success on the other side, whatever that success uh, looks like to that individual.
Mm-hmm.
Mine may not be the same. My level of success or perception of success may not be the same as someone else's. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
perseverance. I would say that would be how I would encapsulate my journey.
Yeah. Well, and it's beautiful to hear you talk about, that goal in high school, saying, I want to design cars. Someone telling you, like, no, this is what you need to do, or this is the path. And you're like, no, I know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
And to now see in your, like, you've been in the industry for 20 years, like there are trucks and vehicles out there with your name
Make
on
me
them,
feel
you know, like
old.
you've designed them.
Yeah.
So it's clear that, like, no, this perseverance has the intended success when you go after it. And I think it's interesting, you also talked about sort of that misnomer or that false idea that like artists and designers don't get
Yeah.
paid or can't survive off of this. I think that's really that first adversity, that first heartbreak, that first like challenge that artists encounter, right? When we are in high school or even younger and say, I want to
Oh
be an
yeah.
artist, I want to paint, I want to create. And someone say like, but you can't, right? Not if you
Right.
want to eat. I think
Right.
a lot of people shut down at that point, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess a question, I know how you were able to counteract that advice or concern, because obviously you're here now. But
Yeah.
if there was a high school student who that was their first encounter, like that was their first adversity in this pursuit of creativity, what advice would you give them if someone told them like, you can't do this for a living?
Wow. Well, my you know what, my advice would be, even though, trust your gut, and even, especially if it's a older, especially if it's an older person who you feel may not fully grasp what, if there's a high schooler says, hey, I want to be a commercial artist, or hey, I want to, I want to be a CG, or I want to do anime or animation, or fashion, and there's no living example around them, and then they have somebody, no, you can't do that. That, that hurts. That cuts like a knife. But my advice would be, well, do you still feel that fire? Do you still feel that, that burning ember? Then I would tell them, be polite and kind and just thank you, and follow your heart, follow your gut. I don't know how many times that in my career path, regardless of wherever I worked, I've come across uh, people in other disciplines, like engineers predominantly.
Mhm.
For me as a car designer, I've
You will
come
run
across
into a lot of them, yeah.
yeah. So, I run across a lot of engineers who are like, oh man, I wanted to be a car designer, but my, fill in the blank, mom, dad, uncle, counselor, whoever told me I shouldn't. And so they went another path that was more comfortable. So the advice, a couple of things I would tell a high school student, a young person, is be comfortable. It's challenging. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
because like before CCS, I went to another college. I went to what I thought air quotes was a state, was a real college, as a university, and had a sports team, and anybody who knows our art school knows CCS is strictly business. It's you know
For visual
yeah.
artists and designers, period.
Yeah. So I was the oddball at my previous school when I went to Kent State University, south of Cleveland. And then when I got accepted to CCS, and I got in at CCS, and then I got there, and I'm walking across, and I see like fine artists, and then I see furniture, and I see textile, I see all these creative, beings of what, of every ethnicity, of every sexual orientation, everybody's listening to everybody else's music, and that's when I felt like, okay, this is where this, so this is where I'm comfortable. So I would say be comfortable in being uncomfortable. You may be the, odd person out, so to speak, but just hold tight and believe in yourself and follow your gut. If that fire is still burning after somebody says, no, you shouldn't follow in art and design or whatever, I'd say just persevere, hold tight, and be comfortable in that little area of discomfort.
I think
Yeah.
that's great advice, because I think oftentimes, I know I've had this mistake made in my path. You think okay, if I'm uncomfortable, maybe this isn't the right place. Maybe I'm not doing the right thing, right?
Right.
And so I think that's beautiful advice to like sit tight, like be okay with that
Yeah.
discomfort, because if you're listening to your gut, if you're sticking to that fire in your belly, you're eventually going to get to a place where you're not just comfortable, you're thriving, you belong,
Right.
you're
Right.
excited. And
Yeah.
I definitely know that that's true for myself and yourself and many of the other, you know, alumni from CCS or people who just pursue their paths in general. But it's not always like it's going to feel perfect every step of the way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's absolutely. I concur. I'll just say that because I can go on and on. And yeah, I've had some of. Yeah. I'll just.
some
I'll
challenges.
let you. Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing, and I don't know how much detail you want to get into, but I know one thing that a lot of CCS graduates have in common is the feeling that CCS was it in and of itself hard, even though you're there and you're surrounded by creative people. There's adversity just in the rigors of the program.
Yeah.
Was that your experience as well?
Yeah. Absolutely. And granted, um, I I I came to CCS when oh before this made me laugh when I was thinking I went to CCS before there was the internet. So yeah, I mean it was the early 90s there, so yeah, it was CCS was what, one, two, three, maybe three or four buildings. There was
Mm-hmm.
the building, the ACB, and then you had the Tinker Toy building, and so the it was grueling. And I feel like my earbud thing is coming out here. Yeah, when I came, I initially felt I was comfortable, but I felt uncomfortable because I was transferring. And when I transferred, I had to start all over. And so those years that I had at my previous college, I was, I was really, I had a fork in the road. Like, do I accept that I'm going to go to Detroit and go to this art school that is world renowned, or do I say thank you for the acceptance, but you're telling me I got to start over, so I'm just going to go on back to this college. But I came, but I wasn't prepared for the level of focus, determination, hunger, um, and passion. And I remember a teacher told me my freshman year, and this is something I've carried throughout my life, or now, is that when you're tired and when you want to give up, one of your competitors is working. So think
Mm-hmm.
about that, and that drove me, but almost to a point where it was almost, well, unhealthy, because I wound up getting ill. Um, uh, well, I think it was midway through my sophomore year, which
Mm-hmm.
was that was a lot. And there was another moment where I'm like, okay, do I hang this up? And that was just in school.
Mm-hmm.
So but I wanted to be the best I could be. And if that meant there was one whole school year that my roommate and my TV broke, we didn't replace it. One, we couldn't afford it. Quite frankly, one, we couldn't afford it, and two, it was already used. So it was like, all right, so it became a book stand. But that one year, that was one of my best. Uh, yeah, I'd say one of my best years at CCS. We had
Mm-hmm.
NPR and CDs, and that was it. And we were focused, and that's when I was an RA in the dorm, and he was in fine arts, and so we were polar opposites in the sense of majors, but we had the same vision and the same drive.
Mm-hmm.
And being around other people who had the same vision, the same hunger, that helped to an extent. That helped me to deal with the challenges. The
Mm-hmm.
emotional challenges were immense, and I look back now, and I can laugh now because I'm on the other side of it. But at the
Yeah.
time, it was like, almost felt like life or death. Like, oh man, if I'm not good in this at this school, which is like one of the best in the world, what else is there? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, and I admit on this, I didn't have a plan B. So if it didn't work out back then, I didn't know what was going to happen.
Mhm.
But by the grace of God, I persevered, and uh, I dealt with the challenges of no sleep, uh, which unfortunately 20 something years later still haunts me. It's like CCS. I always say CCS is like if there's a military, if there's an art school military equivalent, it's got to be CCS or like Art Center in in California, or RISD, or any number of high level art schools, because I've had friends like, oh well, I pulled an all nighter. I've got an hour of sleep, and I'm sure your fellow you like when we
One
say
all
an
nighter, huh?
yeah, yeah. I feel like my grandmother would say, oh well, bless your heart, you only did one.
Right.
With
Right.
so CCS conditioned me, right or wrong. It conditioned me early on that freshman year. Like, how bad do you want it? How hungry are you to go after that passion that's
Hmm.
been inside you, and what are you willing to sacrifice? Don't sacrifice. If I would give advice, I would say don't sacrifice your health
Right.
like I did. And that's a whole nother story where I was ignoring what my body was trying to tell me until I went home and my mom was like, "Who are you? Oh, you're my son. Where what?" I just it was bad. And then my instructors were saying, "Hey, look, if you really do, you need the time to
Hmm.
heal and have surgery and all this other stuff, and you can go down to zero classes and come back later." And then I applauded that, but I was just so driven, and I had gotten to a point where this was my dream. I'm at the
Hmm.
dream school. I didn't know Detroit. Detroit's Motor City, Motown, cars. And I said, "Hey, look, man, can we get me down to one class? Can you guys work that out? Because I think just sitting, recovering, not being creative and not being challenged, and having the teachers pour into me all that they've learned, and interacting with other creatives, I thought that would in me." So,
Hmm.
um, but I would challenge those now to listen to your body, not
Yeah.
just your physical body, but your emotional state.
Yeah.
CCS is tough, and I remember when I was there, it was um, it was a weird period when my mother and I drove up, because we're from Cleveland, not rich, and we had what I call one of those around town cars that just could only make it around a town, but to try to get on the highway and drive from Cleveland to Detroit, so that wasn't going to cut it. So we got a rental car and we drove up, and we pulled into the parking lot where anybody who's been to the original campus, there's a parking structure now, but that was a parking lot. That was just a simple parking lot. We pull in there, and I kid you not, we saw there was a couple of Porsches and these expensive cars. And my mom looked at me outside of the city, looking how it did back then.
Hmm.
She had some choice words because my mom was an architect, so she's looking at it from that standpoint, like, "What? Oh, you really want to go here?" And then we're in the parking lot. She's like, "Oh, we can't afford this place." And it's like, okay, it's going to be your determination, your hustle. Don't get sidetracked by the wealth of students' parents. Don't get
Hmm.
intimidated by that. Let your talent be your currency. And yeah, so it's worked out so far. But anyway,
I think that's great advice, because I think sometimes I've seen in my experience there have been students who, come in with a bunch of wealth and they're not paying for school themselves, or they come in with a full scholarship, or they come in from being like an all-star student and they come to CCS and they're still an all-star comparatively.
right,
And
right.
because they don't, some of, not all of them, but some of them, because they didn't have that uh, need for grit, for perseverance, for etc. some of them dropped off. I know some full ride students who didn't make it through, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's just a great thing to just note, that like perseverance, your determination, your passion, and your personal worth is what matters more than some of these outside factors that can seem like they would be determining factors of whether you would succeed or not, right? Those aren't the things that
Yeah.
actually determine that. But I also want to just go a little bit back to something you said earlier and re-emphasize this, especially for any of
Oh,
my students who are watching, and that's about listening to your body and your health.
yeah.
I know the school has done a lot of work recently within the Wellness Center and with our first year experience class to make sure our students are cared for and talked to about their personal wellness and self-care, because all of this work, pursuing your goals and your creativity and all of that and that drive, it doesn't matter if you're bombed out and depleted and
Right.
exhausted and depressed because your body is failing you, right? And so I
Exactly.
think that's a wonderful piece of advice, is like, yes, you want to grind, you want to, you want to be hungry, you want to go after
Yeah.
this knowledge that you're getting, but not at the expense of yourself.
Right. Right. There's
That's
there's a balance there.
yeah.
You know, there's a balance. You are your temple. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, another piece of advice I heard then, and I didn't take heed to it until after I was out. But when I was in the automotive design program, and one of my instructors, Ford uh, designer Ford, and he's still there now, and a good friend and a mentor. But I remember he told me, he said, "Don't get married to your work."
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you mean? Because when you're in school, you know, the cool thing with CCS is you're around all these fellow creatives who are just focused, just like, you know, and for the most part, for the most part, you're all poor and we're all poor together. Nobody has a lot of money. And okay, like, hey, look, I got an idea for this. All right, what time is it? 2:30. Is the wood shop open? No, but I got some tools. All right, so let's sketch this out. Let's get some Bondo or whatever, or let's get some acrylic or some oils and throw something on a canvas. Let's make it. So the cool thing, that's one of the cool things, but the passion and determination is, you have to balance that with, don't get too attached. I don't know how to,
No,
because
yeah, I get
it's like,
exactly what you're saying.
don't get married to your work. It's like, have enough passion that's going to drive you to do the best you can. But at a point, realize that you have to have a level of detachment, especially if it's something that you're, you know, that you're going to, how can I put it, like maybe expose, or maybe in a show where now you're being vulnerable. I feel like, and maybe it's because I'm an artist and a designer, but I feel like anybody creative, I know musicians and I know people who act. In my opinion, anything in the creative art space, that's like the ultimate form of vulnerability,
Heck yeah.
because you're exposing your heart, and you're exposing your baby, you know,
Mm-hmm.
this thing you've nurtured, you know, your craft, you're married to it, and then it's like, oh, and then for you to sell it, now you got to see it go away, and you're like, oh man. So don't get married to your work, and that could actually have, you know, some, I've seen it where it's had some very unhealthy emotional outcomes when I was at school, when people
Mm-hmm.
didn't get into um, the automotive program. Back then, I can't remember the numbers, but CCS was, and still to this day, one of its ace in the holes, or its feathers, is the automotive design program. And so a lot of the students that were coming wanted to be in the automotive design program. Well, not everybody got in.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the freshman year, they literally would put a list. I don't know if they still do this
They
now.
don't do that anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. They literally put a list, like, you know, this old TV show Fame. They had a list on the wall next to the department head's office. And so everybody's rushing over to see if their name's on the list. And if your name wasn't on the list, I knew a lot of people whose name was not on the list. And I remember the day that I found out mine was, and my girlfriend at the time, we went. out to celebrate, and we're sitting there right at the corner of the dorm building, and just seeing people who didn't make it. They were throwing their stuff out the window, all this expensive art stuff, because emotionally they had invested so much and things didn't go their way. So that's why I say it's good to have that balance of have
Yeah.
enough passion and focus, but realize, hey, okay, have a little detachment. You can always do better on the next project.
Yep.
So
I think that's amazing advice. I think it's phrased well from your advisors at CCS. My
yeah,
department chair, Marcus Apico, he said, don't fall in love with your babies.
yeah,
Because they would, rip stuff off the wall or
yeah,
cross
yeah,
out
yeah.
things if it wasn't strong. And I think that advice, like as a college student, that's a little heartbreaking. It's like, but I worked hard on that, or I thought that was a great
Right.
idea. But in the industry, I think that advice has prepared so many of us, because in the industry, you have clients and it's not personal, right? They're like, okay,
Yeah.
this works for the client, this doesn't. This idea is going to go, this pitch didn't make it, and I
Right.
think having that advice, it doesn't, it's not toughening you up so you're unaffected or calloused about
Yeah.
work, but it's like, I know that I have an infinite well of creativity. I know I have an infinite source of creative ideas. So if this doesn't make it, I'm on to the next one. I think that was
Right.
advice that another alum had, not in an IG live, but in another video. They were saying, like, by the time I submit something, I'm done with it. I don't even, like, I'll get
Right.
the critique, I'll fix it, but my brain is on to the next project. So I'm not even affected about, that feedback. I'm already thinking 2 projects ahead. So I think,
Exactly.
that's an excellent perspective. I think that's great advice for artists, whether you're in college or not. Just
Yeah.
love with your,
Yeah.
don't marry the work. Don't fall in love with your babies.
I would say yes and yes. I'm like that. Yeah, and I didn't realize that until like the clothing, the apparel that we relaunched, and a lot of other projects, because I'm already, you know I'm like 4 or 5 steps beyond. Oh, I'm like, okay, one project is great, and I'm already thinking 2 projects ahead. Or I remember when I was at Ford. Yeah, my internship at Ford. That was, I give CCS a lot of credit for getting me prepared for that, because that was I had come off my medical condition, and I lived and had my surgery, and everything was great, and so I'm still in school. Then that's when the TV died that school year. So I was really focused, and then I earned this internship, and it's like, oh, okay, wow, wow, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Sweet. Okay, be cool, be cool, be cool. But be cool. But I wanted to throw myself into everything. And one of my studio chiefs said similar. He said, we you see that clay model over there of that redesign of whatever car. We're already 2 steps past that. So it was only reinforcing, put your all into it, but then, all right, step ahead. And that really came to fruition when I was at Ford. I didn't realize that till now, talking with you. So after a while, there's a lot of memories, or as I like to say, there's a lot of carbon built up in, back in the back of my brain. So I gotta find the memories. But yeah,
That's awesome. And I think that's something that's interesting particularly about the automotive design industry, that they're oftentimes working on vehicles,
oh
you
yeah,
know, 5 years ahead. Like, and yeah, it's something
yeah,
that it's common in the industry. So I wanted to pause here because obviously I
okay,
will ask you questions until the end of
yeah,
the
yeah,
earth. But I just want to open it up for any of our folks who are tuning in live. Welcome. Hello, everyone. I see you
okay,
all have been active in the chat. If you have questions for Bryan about pursuing your creativity, about persevering through adversity as an artist or designer, about being an alum, working in
yeah,
the transportation field, make sure to drop those questions in the little Q&A box here on Instagram so we can have your questions answered live, because I definitely want to make sure you get your questions answered. I
Yeah, I
can't
see.
catch up with everything in the chat, so hopefully you
Yeah,
all are pressing the question box there at the
yeah.
bottom.
I see
Um,
a lot of my friends joined. Thank you guys.
the
They're,
support
they're,
is the support of
yeah,
the community. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I
But
love it.
the the one thing I would say, while we wait for anybody to throw some questions out though, is that you know, the cool thing, it's not like we're talking as alum of this prestigious art school, and it's something I've tried to get a little more comfortable talking about CCS like that for me, because to me I'm just like, all right, it's just my life,
Mhm.
but that people don't realize, one, there's a lot of people don't realize, oh, you can get a career in art and design. But that's a prestigious school, and that's something that anybody who is able to go there should be proud of.
Mhm.
And to me, what we're talking about is it just doesn't necessarily apply to art and design, but to life.
Yeah.
If you are hungry for something, or if you have a desirability, or a desire, I should say, desirability. If you have a desire, you know, what's stopping you? There's always going to be an obstacle. There's always going to be an obstacle. I've had a fair share, more than that, that can fill up the time that we have, from you know career, and I've been laid off several times. I've shared, like, when I was at CCS, not on here, but with um, uh, uh, people and students. Hey, um, you may see me like now, but there's a journey to get there, and that journey wasn't easy. When I went to CCS, there were uh, friends of mine, same thing. They did the entrance portfolio, got accepted, then got into the school, and then got accepted into the car design program
Mhm.
and graduated, and off, off into this, into the sunset at a car company. And that was it. And God had a different plan for me. One, I didn't agree with, because I'm like, all right, you know, got here, I was on Real Talk. I was on food stamps when I was at CCS. I didn't have a car, and I quickly learned that Detroit is a place where you need a car.
Yeah.
And so there was all these obstacles. I wound up that first year, and I'm pretty transparent with this. Like, it's, I guess, an example of my perseverance. Um, I worked, I think, 3 jobs that first summer,
Mhm.
and also I didn't realize Michigan, you get 10 cents for recycling cans. And I was dumpster diving, getting aluminum cans and bottles, to the point where at the old dorm, behind it, I got into let's just say, a healthy debate with somebody from the homeless community, because he thought he had laid claim to this dumpster, and he's like, "What? Why are you taking my cans? You go to this fancy school, you're rich." I'm like, and I looked at him. I was like, "Sir, if you think I am rich, would I be doing this?" And so we came to agreement. I fell for him. I said, "Well, I tell you what, just give me Tuesdays and Thursdays, all right?" So true story. I dumpstered, so I did what I could to to get a vehicle, just so
Mhm.
I can get around the city. And eventually, my point, I graduated, but my path wasn't easy. I didn't get hired right away, and then I eventually did get a job, in my field as a professional designer. But then it was a short-term contract position,
Mhm.
and that was emotionally devastating for me when I got the the tap on the shoulder, like, "Hey, great, thank you, nothing personal, get your stuff, get out, you're good." I'm like, "Whoa, wait, what?" And then to go from there to other companies that I worked at, here, and when I lived in Germany, where these companies whether I won't mention some of their names, but automotive industry and non-automotive that would hit hard times and they would have to downsize. That was my path. So I I I would challenge anybody. Just it's not just about art; it's about life. And along my journey, I've learned that okay, what can I do with my art? What can I, you know, so many people at CCS and my family, my friends have poured into me. You know, what can I do to give back
Mhm.
through my talent? So yeah. Sorry, I'm going on, but you're talking about yeah, I could just talk about uh, my, I guess, aspects of my life and my journey and how CCS has been a huge part of that,
Mhm.
a huge part of that. So yeah, but,
I can relate on
yeah,
multiple
yeah,
multiple levels to that sentiment that, like you said, not everyone who goes to CCS is rich, and not everyone's path
right,
is a direct path. There, and I think that's the beauty of these conversations is just students to see that it takes all different forms. But like
right,
we start off at the beginning of the conversation talking about some of the highlights in your career, like it's worth it. Your work can lead you to a career where you're being creative, you're being compensated for that, and the world gets to see your creative talent, right?
yeah,
I see that we
right.
have a few questions in the question box, so I'm going to
Okay,
pop those open.
okay.
Um, oh, this is an interesting question. You mentioned earlier that you have a family, and a question that came up
Hmm.
was, how do you encourage your children to be creative? Do they aspire to be in the art field? I think that's a great question.
Whew, I don't know. I think that's like I equate that to like I chuckle because I see such similarities in our in a fellow creative field of actors and entertainers and celebrities, and I love movies, and I don't know how many actors that I've seen say, oh, when they ask that and they're like, oh, hell no, I don't encourage my kids to go follow me, and they wind up doing it. I don't do that either, but I see it in my kids.
Mhm.
I got, I see it. And so I'm kind of taking the tact of how my mom did with me. So
Mhm.
my mom was an artist, but she went in architecture, but she did um, uh, she did charcoal drawings. That was her big thing for her outlet. So she saw the talent in me at an early age, but my mom didn't push it on me.
Mhm.
But she blocked people. I always think like in football, like, I'm the running back and my mom was the blocker when everybody like, oh, you should go to engineering school. Nope, just leave them alone. So
Yes,
that's what
mom.
yeah. So that's what so I lightweight to answer your question. I lightweight encourage my kids. My oldest, he wants to be a marine biologist. My middle son, he wants to be an astronaut and an astronomer and something with animals. I'm like, well, dude, you
I always say
put it
Mae
all.
Jemison was a dancer and an
Yeah,
astronaut. You can do
exactly.
multiple things.
Well, I'm like, all right, well, I'm selfish, so I'm looking at my oldest son. Like, hey, there's some good marine biology schools in Hawaii. I'm just saying. And my youngest, he's the one that's more like he's out of my three, and the youngest, he's the one that's that as a parent, your parents often have told you, I hope one day you have a child that acts just like how you
That
that
he's
that
the one.
yeah, where I'm like, where's my Bible? Whew, I'm gonna pray because he's doing the car noises like I did when I was a kid. He's drawing on everything. I'm like, you do know we're in church, right? You just can't draw on the pew like that. So, but that's yeah. So I lightweight encourage. I don't,
Mhm.
I don't discourage, but I'm trying to expose all of my children uh, to everything. We go before COVID. We would take annual treks down to the art museum, down to
Mhm.
the DIA, and go to places that have inspired me. Like
Mhm.
especially when I don't know if this rings a bell with you, but you often hear about writers having writer's block.
Yep.
And they just, so I'm like, there's got to be an equivalent like artist block or designer's block or whatever. So when I was in school, I would go down to Belle Isle, and those that are not familiar
Mhm.
with Detroit, Belle Isle is it's like a little island on the river between, well, not even Detroit, technically between the U.S. and Canada, and
Mhm.
it's the coolest place, and you can go sit, park, and you're near the water, best you can be here in Detroit. So I'd go down to Belle Isle. People cruise around the island, and that's where I would sit and like, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but that's where I'd sit and meditate and get
Mhm.
alone with myself and
Mhm.
my spirit, and really think about, all right, what's blocking me from the project. And then it got to the point after I graduated and um I was working professionally, I'd still do it. And I've started taking the kids, and they're like, why are we here? Gosh. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh,
Zipped out.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I try to encourage, but not strong arm. Although if my
Yeah, a
son was on
balanced
here,
approach.
yeah, he'd
That
probably
that
say otherwise.
So here is another country. I think you touched on this quickly, mentioning Germany, but another viewer asked, "Have you ever designed cars for a foreign country?"
Foreign country or foreign company or
You can answer either way,
yeah.
I guess. I mean, because
So
if it's for another country or
yeah.
another a foreign company,
Ooh, that one. Yes. Well, when I was in Germany, I designed. So BMW has BMW motorcycles. Their motorcycle brand is called BMW Motorrad.
mhm,
And so what I did back then, I was at a supplier company, and
mhm,
for those that not familiar, so you've got your car companies, and
mhm,
then well, they got to buy stuff from somewhere, so they can't design everything. And so then you have supplier companies. So there's companies, for example, there's one called Lear, and Lear is pretty much known for their interiors. They
mhm,
can design and manufacture interiors and so on. So this company I worked at in Germany, they were a supplier company. They were a tier one, which meant
mhm.
they were like right lockstep, had access to the studios, the automotive design studios. And I designed, it seems so archaic now in this time of iPads and digital, but I designed gauges for BMW motorcycles. And we had Mercedes was also a client. And I lived in outside of Stuttgart in Sindelfingen. And that's Mercedes capital. That's like Dearborn here in suburban
Uh,
Detroit.
I
So
got that equivalent.
yeah, so Dear for those that don't know, Dearborn is like that's Ford headquarters. So you
Mhm.
can you can just take one step in Dearborn and run into like 75 Fords. They're everywhere. So that's a single thing. And so yeah, I designed stuff um, for so I guess you could say technically for the country that was German, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, my career and things that I've designed have ranged from full cars to something small. Everything around you has been touched by a designer. And I tell people the cool thing, if design is done right, you 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 don't think nothing of it. I think
Yep.
we all think about design when something is wrong. Like when you're going
Yes.
to say, for example, you're going to get in, you're at the airport, you're getting a rental car, you go to grab the door handle, and it's not deep enough to get your hand in. So now you're complaining, or where are the switches, or that's design fail. You're like, oh, this looks good, but you're sitting there cursing. The designers failed. If you're at the store and you're just looking for whatever, toothpaste, and you're standing there in the aisle and you're like, damn, man, where's the designers failed. One, the packaging designers failed in the sense that they did not design a compelling visual that will capture the user, the customer, you. So yeah, design is all around us, from anything from what my iPod, or excuse me, AirPod case, to even a mouse. The things that you don't think about. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I've designed a wide range of things, from vehicles to, I shared with some friends. I was asked to design a prom dress once for a coworker, and that was I'm not a yeah. So it's still creative. You
Mm-hmm.
just switch, creative problem solving. So
Form
yeah,
and
sorry.
function.
Yeah, answer your question. Yeah, I've designed for other countries or car companies.
That's awesome. All righty. So those are the questions that we have from
Yeah.
our audience. I know we are
All right.
coming up close on our
Yeah.
time with
Okay.
Instagram because it's going to cut us off at
Yeah.
8. Um, so I just want to end with one last question. Hopefully we can fit it in, but it's my favorite question of all the alumni live interviews. If you were to
Okay.
be able to acquire a magical time machine and go back to your high school self as you're getting ready to go to Kent State and
Yeah.
then eventually CCS, as you were beginning this creative journey that has led you to these
Yeah.
20 years of success, what advice would you give your 17, 18-year-old self about pursuing creativity and
Ooh.
persevering along the way?
Uh, I good question. I what advice would I give my 17? I'm think well, I'm thinking how I was at 17 and how I didn't appreciate the talent I had. Yeah, well, maybe that was, yeah. We could start there. I probably would tell myself, like, yo, dude, that talent that you're kind of like wishy-washy on, that you've had, for a while up until that point, that can take you somewhere. Just, cut out the BS. Because I was a knucklehead back then, and I swear it's by the grace of God I'm still here. Yeah, the yeah, that's what I would tell my younger self, and that talent that you're taking for granted, that's a gift from God, and I do feel and believe all of us have something. God's put something in all of us that if you're not using it, you're sitting on it. So,
Mm-hmm.
get out there and not just use it for yourself, but help, give that to somebody else. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I would tell my younger self. Don't sit on the talent that you have, and you're not the best, but you're not the worst. Just stay hungry and keep going, and you know we'll eventually get to a good place, and keep it rolling.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Brian, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I
All right.
appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your journey, your advice, your
All right.
stories.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know if it's
I don't
wisdom.
think I'm
It's just
ever
me.
going to look at you dumpsters around CCS the same again.
I'll keep it real. I'm telling you.
I appreciate it. And I'm sure the folks who are tuning in and watching the recording will appreciate it as well. Thank you so much for everything that you shared with
Yeah.
us today. I know I'm leaving today inspired, and I hope everyone watching does the same. Make sure
Yeah.
you all tune in for our next CCS Alumni Live. Thank you so much, Brian. You have a beautiful
Yeah.
evening.
All right. Thank you, Brandy. You too.
Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.